priests, deacons in the church. Unfortunately, the council had to be suspended prematurely. It was not able to complete its work. And the reason why it had to be suspended was because of the Franco-Prussian War had erupted, a war between France and Prussia in 1870. And why that affected the council was as a result of the Pope losing his papal states, the temporal possessions of the Pope in Italy. French troops had been sent to guard him and protect him against all this uprising that had been occurring in Italy during the time. And these French troops have to leave Rome and go and fight. And so the Holy Father was concerned, obviously, for his safety and the safety of the Council Fathers meeting in the Vatican, so he suspended the Council indefinitely. And actually, the Council wouldn't officially be ended until the calling of the Second Vatican Council. One of the first actions of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, which we'll talk about in our next time period, was to officially close the First Vatican Council. So we have the First Vatican Council, we have the pontificate of Pope Blessed Pius IX, who he addresses through his Syllabus of Errors, and through the calling of the Council, the modernist attack against the Church, and the great cloud of intellectual confusion that had gripped the Church during this period of time. So we also now see, we saw what happened in France with the French Revolution, how the Church is under persecution in France. We saw that in the 18th century. Now in the 19th century, we see the Church in a non-violent way become persecuted in Germany. And this is known as the Kulturkampf in Germany, or the fight, again, the culture fight that erupted in Germany. Now, as I've talked throughout the last several sessions, we've gone through our whole history of the Church. I've mentioned several times that Germany did not become a united country until the 19th century. That Germany was a collection of a bunch of, over 300 at one point, different dukedoms and principalities and different regional areas. It wasn't until this time now, the 19th century, under the works of Otto von Bismarck, that the Church, or that Germany actually becomes a unified country. Protestant Prussia was the dominant state in the north of Germany at the time. Catholic Bavaria and Austria were the dominant states in Germany, or loosely called Germany, in the south during this time. Under the king, the German king, the Emperor Otto von Bismarck then unites the country together, and he wants to ensure that Germany, in 1871, he wants to ensure that Germany is united not just politically, but that she's united culturally as well. And so he begins to force the Catholic state of Bavaria and other Catholic parts of Germany into forces them and tries to bring them into a more Protestant line through this whole culture war. What he does is he begins to try to subject the state, the church rather, to the state, subject the Catholic Church to the state. What he does first is in 1872, he has the Jesuits and other Catholic religious orders expelled from Germany. Again, we see the attack on the Jesuits. Anyone who wants to try to control their state and have an absolute control over the state or of a region has to get rid of the Jesuits, because they form this block of people, group of people who are loyal to a foreign power in the minds of these secular leaders. They're loyal to the Holy Father. So he expels the Jesuits and other Catholic religious orders. He begins to round up and imprison Catholic bishops and priests. Church-run schools are seized by the state and turned into state-run schools. He also goes and attacks the monasteries and convents and forcibly closes them as well. Eventually, this culture war would exist in Germany over a 15-year period of time. And eventually, it would be resolved peacefully with an agreement between Bismarck and Pope Leo XIII. And the Church, Pope Leo XIII, conceded that the Church would allow for the state approval of clerical appointments, that the Church would also allow for public education to be controlled by the state, and that the state law would reign supreme throughout Germany. What the state agreed to do was to allow Catholics the free exercise and the public exercise of their faith without any fear of governmental control or governmental intrusion. And we'll see as we move into our next time period of a world at war, this is kind of the first beginnings of the Church trying to come into an agreement with secular rulers. They begin to institute and agree to the what come to be known as concordats, or agreements that are reached between the Catholic Church and between these secular European governments that have moved away from their roots, their Christian roots. And the reason why the Church engages in these concordats is to try to safeguard the rights of the Church, the right of the Church to exist, and the rights of Catholics to freely practice their faith. Now, our time period of revolutions and modernism ends with the reign of two great saintly popes, who not only again addressed this issue of modernism, but tried to put the church on a firm foundation before she is really fundamentally attacked in our next time period. And so we have Pope Leo XIII, who comes to the throne of St. Peter after Blessed Pope Pius IX. Pope Leo XIII had as his main objective as Pope to reach out to the modern world. What he wanted to do was prevent the church from becoming insular. There were many who were arguing that Europe had so moved away from her Christian roots. She'd so moved away from Christian civilization, founded, built up, and supported by the church, that the church should now just forego any kind of activity outside of herself, that she should really just become insular. She should focus only on herself and just really try to maintain her presence and her existence and not be outwardly focused. And Leo XIII fought against that and said, no, the church needs to maintain her focus of engaging the modern world. As much as it's changed, we the church have to understand that change and find a way to bring the gospel to the modern world. The church has to find a way to adjust to the modern political reality. He made that his main objective as under his papacy. He also issued one of the great social encyclicals in the history of the church, known as Rerum Novarum, in 1891. And this was a time, remember we said earlier in our beginning of our time period, of industrialization, the foundation of great companies and factories and workers. And so he writes in Rerum Novarum about labor unions and the place and the rightful place that labor unions have in society, and the right for workers to join together in order to make sure that their rights are safeguarded. He also said that, importantly, that man precedes the state. And so the state does not have complete control over the individual, nor should the state have complete control over the individual. That the first foundational cell of society is the family. Man and the family precede the state. So the state does not have absolute control or autonomy over the individual, and that will come into play specifically in our next time period of a world at war. He also said that man should be, or that workers should be, they should have a right to earn a livable wage. That companies and businessmen should pay their workers a wage that they can live by. And he also then wrote and gave the church the great prayer of St. Michael in order to pray against the satanic activities that will happen in the next century in our next time period of a world at war. Finally, we end with Pope St. Pius X, who was a great and holy man. Some of his papal accomplishments was that he began the recodification of the Code of Canon Law. He was a great devoted priest and pastor before he became Pope. He also had an emphasis on the Eucharist, and he allowed children at the age of reason to receive the Eucharist. He addressed the issue of modernism by issuing his encyclical Pascendi Dominici Egregius in 1907, where he talks about and calls modernism the synthesis of all heresy, and requires an oath of all theology faculty to be taken against modernism. He establishes that in 1910. So our period comes to an end with the church under attack, being placed on a firm foundation by these saintly popes as she enters into our next time period of a world at war, which we'll talk about later.
So, anybody start to see anything similar in there to what we see today? Yeah, we see a lot of, with modernism. He talks about how it's a very pernicious way to attack the faith, because instead of just an outright denial of, say, the divinity of Christ, it's the meaning of what this is. Okay, so the loaves and the fishes was a good example. We talk about how, it was really about getting people to share. Well, that's not what Christ did. And if you start to get people away from what the Gospels actually taught and what Christ actually performed, then you start to undermine the faith completely. And so, as we saw, that had a very devastating effect in France and beyond. So, what we can do, since we are a few minutes behind time, seems like as always, we can just jump straight into the questions, and then we can do a back and forth on those. If you want to reference the answer key as well, the responses on my book, it's page 181. And so we've got 7 questions, and we may or may not be able to cover all those, but we'll just go ahead and start and get your thoughts. So the first question for this lesson is, how did the Enlightenment change philosophy? What was René Descartes' solution to the problem of doubt? And what was Descartes' main focus? What is kind of the key tags?
Man decides what a man wants.
Right, exactly. So it's, and I think therefore
Therefore
I am.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I thought that was actually a joke. I didn't know if they really believe that.
Yeah.
When I said that, I thought, yeah, I didn't, yeah, I didn't.
So, you know, what was he trying to push people to do or think or?
Won't reject God,
Mhm.
that there is no God.
Yeah. So I mean, this
Their
is
reason is. you
reason
know,
is
this-
superior.
Yeah, we don't need God.
Right. And so, you know, he's an Enlightenment philosopher, and as we hear and hear, it was not about, okay, how can we explain our existence in relation to God? It's all about how can we explain everything without God. And when you remove God from the equation, it crumbles completely.
Yeah.
So that's really what the Enlightenment was focusing on, and why we start to see things go so wrong as people, you know, implement that philosophy.
Patrick, couldn't you also say that it's kind of a move away from putting God first
Mhm.
to man being first,
Yep.
you know, and now, just opposite of the very first commandment we all taught.
Mhm.
we taught.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, is it any wonder that it failed and that it caused such chaos, death, destruction? You know, when we start to ignore God, and we essentially we are making ourselves into God. When we believe modernist and Enlightenment type of philosophies, we are saying that we are more important than God, that we are our own God. And we try to explain God away. You know, God is dead, whether you're talking about Nietzsche or anybody else. And the focus becomes, well, it's all about me. It's all about my moral philosophy. What's good for me may not be good for you, so I'm going to do what I want, you do what you want. But then, of course, we see where that fails, because there is no overarching moral philosophy that we all implement. And that's why, okay, well, I think these people aren't actually people, so we're going to eliminate them as an entire group. And that's how you end up with things like the Nazis, and how you end up with the French Revolution, where you eliminate thousands and thousands of Catholics. And it just goes on and on from there. So, good points on there. What motivated the suppression of the Jesuits, and how was it achieved? And who was a main personality that was pushing this?
Voltaire.
Voltaire, right. So yeah, Voltaire, he was one of the biggest proponents against the Catholic Church, against religion and faith in general. And you know, he wanted to convince the monarch, he wanted to convince all of those in the country that the church was unnecessary. And so the suppression, it says here, suppression was achieved through the power of the kings. So if you get to the leadership, convince them that this is unnecessary, we don't need the church, then you can undermine the faith, because, you know, it rolls downhill. So, yeah. So the Jesuits were expelled in Portugal, then from France, then from Spain, and eventually Pope Clement XIV, who was indebted to King Charles III, signed an order in 1773 to suppress the Jesuits across the board. So, you know, the philosophy, or the idea there was, we're going to work through the leadership and eventually expel the Jesuits. And I thought it was an interesting point too, about how, what happens when you get to the education system, you know? So what, did you all think about that? Was that anything that, because if you get to the education system, what happens?
There's a line in Ben-Hur at the beginning when, I forget his name, comes back and says you control the people with your mind, with another idea.
Okay.
You plant an idea and then you can control.
Yep, yeah.
Similar to what's happening in some colleges today.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
sure. Yeah, we see it in the college environment now. I mean, safe spaces. Colleges are supposed to be the opposite of safe spaces for intelligence and for debate. It should be where people come together with varying ideas and debate each other and talk about those things, as opposed to, oh, well, I don't want to talk about that issue, you know, that'll upset someone. No, colleges should be the place where that debate goes on, where you understand the issues, where you work through those issues. But yeah, we've really lost that.
Well,
And-
because you'd be politically incorrect if
Mhm.
you bring up anything.
Yeah.
You know, or if you ask a question, then that's crazy,
Right.
you know?
So,
Did anybody else recently see the movie God Is Not Dead, number
I
2?
saw that.
But it was the same thing,
Another one
she,
coming out
she
now.
dared to answer a question that a student had and reference the Bible, and that was why she was put on trial, well, called the trial. But I thought of that, it's very much, you know, separating church and state, you can't bring anything about church into it. It just, after having just seen the movie, it was like, wow,
yeah, kinda
this
hits home.
this was happening way back then, you
Yeah.
know, and it's happening today in our society.
Yep. Well, he alluded to it a little bit, but in our next time period, I mean, we're gonna see communism come in. And one of the big things about communism is we are subservient to the state. State first, then us. And that's not the way society is structured. God structured it where the family unit is the core. And so if we start with society and it's all about the community and community first, that's where we get communism. And that's what they needed to do in order to shift us away from a God-based society to a me-based society. Get in the education system, change that, and then you can change people's minds, their ideals, and create your own society, which is far, far away from what God intended. So, okay, question number 3. The French Revolution is one of the most awful events in modern history, but countless modern myths have obscured this reality. What were your thoughts on the French Revolution before you started this session of the Epic Timeline, and how has your opinion changed? What new facts did you learn that surprised you the most?
I didn't realize that the king was actually trying to support the people.
Mm-hmm. What was your thoughts? I mean, if someone said French Revolution, do you think bloody murder? Do you think against the Catholic Church? Do you think of 20,000 people being slaughtered and
No.
beheaded for their
No.
faith? No, I mean, the way it's portrayed in our society is, oh, French Revolution, okay, well, they won their independence from somebody, and there was the Bastille, and yeah, that's all
Yeah.
kind of good, right?
They're miserable.
Mm-hmm. But in reality, if you look at it from what actually happened, it was a very horrible, gruesome, bloody thing that led to the country itself losing its faith, led to a lot of people losing their lives, and was a very bad thing for France and for Europe, for many of the countries around them. So, and it also spilled over into other countries as well, such as
Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to question number 4. What is modernism, and can you name some of the principal characteristics of it?
It's very much like today, with people losing faith and, like the government, banning prayer in schools, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
or sporting events.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What other thoughts?
Well, you're rejecting the supernatural, like God. You know, like we watch on TV now, it's called magic.
Mm-hmm.
There is no such thing as God. It's when things happen, it's magic. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, are people serious? And so, I mean, but you know, there is no God, you know, modern. But it's just kind of back to, I mean, live your life the way you want to.
Mm-hmm.
There just is no God.
Yeah, making ourselves God.
Right,
And
we're God.
taking
There's
God's
some-
place.
And there are some religions that kind of do that. You die and you become a God and have your own planet with your God with your own, you know, and
Yeah.
there's stuff like
Has-
that.
We moved from Colorado. Has Texas seen international baccalaureate schools around here?
There are IB, yeah, in Denton there's IB.
And that's what I was mentioning
She
too.
mentioned me because when he talked about moral relativism,
Yeah,
where you
there's no right or
you
wrong.
make your own value judgment.
Mm-hmm.
We steered our son away from all the IB because IB curriculum, it makes sense now. It started in France,
Mm-hmm.
and with the idea of moral relativism, you kind of make your own opinion. They would have math problems where if you could justify your wrong answer because you felt it was right,
It would
you'd
be
get
right.
credit.
For it.
And that's because it makes sense. This is an out, you know, a continuation of what has started.